From the time of the colonial period in this country, and with European origins before that, we have the United Church of Christ today. That's the faith tradition that we will be exploring today on Austin Faith Dialogue. Please join us.
Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life. A series highlighting the cultural and social interactions between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KXAN. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
Hello, I'm Richard Thompson of Austin Metropolitan Ministries, welcoming you to this edition of the show. And today we're pleased to highlight a faith tradition that has roots in early America, New England, and before that, England and the continent. It's the United Church of Christ, previously known as the Congregational Church, the Evangelical Reformed Church, that were united in the middle of this century. In the Austin area, there are a number of these churches that are represented that we're going to learn about today from our two guests. We have Dr. Mark Miller, the minister of the South Central Conference Office. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
And the Reverend Christine Tinker, the new pastor of the United Church of Christ at Copeland, Texas.
Thank you.
And I would like to say that it's a real privilege to welcome you because you're both kind of new to the Austin area, aren't you? When did you come?
I began my position as conference minister, Rich, in August 15th of 1997. So I've been here less than a year.
Okay. Well, you're not a native Texan yet, but working toward it.
And trying to learn how to pronounce some of those new words.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And I began the end of September. So I'm newer than Mark, and I'm working on my Texan.
You told me before the show that you were originally from England. And how did you happen to come to Copeland, Texas? And tell us a little bit about...
That's a long journey. But it really is tied into also the history of the United Church of Christ.
Okay.
I was a Congregationalist in England, and I worked for the International Congregational Council. And through that, became familiar with the Congregational Church in Connecticut and was invited to spend a year working with one of those churches. And after that year, decided to stay. And the history of the church, of course, is, as you said, the Congregational and Christian churches which joined together, and then the Evangelical Reformed, bringing together both strands. But I came in the midst of the furor of becoming the United Church of Christ. And the church I came to work for actually was the church that did not choose to join the United Church of Christ and went on its own journey. So it was an exciting time to be in the mix.
What year are we talking about?
1957, June of 1957. We celebrated 40 years last year, and this is our 41st birthday, so we truly are middle-aged.
Well, now, I think as far as the general public is concerned, they might identify the UCC church, the Congregationalists before that, with the Pilgrims, with the Separatists who came from England.
And there's a very close connection with that. And that was the starting of course, the Plymouth Plantation in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and the growth of Puritanism and then Congregational history and heritage.
Okay. Well, now, Mark, you were telling me before the show that you have a little bit of that German side to your background.
Rich, that's very much part of the United Church of Christ, not only the congregational beginnings of our denomination, but also evangelical and reformed, which is the German side. My own particular background, my grandparents actually migrated to the United States from Nootka, Russia, along the Volga River, and all the way out to Portland, Oregon. In fact, as a child, the worship service was all in German until I was about 12 years old.
Oh, really?
And then they decided to bring in some English.
Well, now, here in Central Texas, there's a fairly significant component of those that were the evangelical and reform with that German background, isn't there?
Yes. One of our seminaries is Eden Theological Seminary in St. Louis, Missouri. And back earlier in this century, many of the seminarians who graduated from Eden would come down to Texas and serve churches. Mainly south of Austin in the New Braunfels area, we have a number of churches that have the ENR history as part of their experience.
Okay.
The church I serve in Copeland, for example, St. Peter's, was a German-speaking church up until the mid-1950s when they got a pastor who didn't speak German. And so they then had to let the German service go.
I see. Well, now, give us a little bit of a sense of how much territory is covered by your South Central Conference.
The South Central Conference includes the states of Texas and Louisiana, and also we have a mission project called Back Bay Mission in Biloxi, Mississippi. We are not a large denomination in this part of the country, actually very small. We have 90 churches with about 16,000 members. And my responsibility as conference minister is to be a pastor to all the pastors and a minister at large to each of the churches.
It's a big job to be doing it. Don't you have some help on that?
Well, there's plenty of help in the local churches, but we do spell distance in capital letters.
All right. And what about the, you find that people get you mixed up with the Church of Christ, since you're called the United Church of Christ?
I think that's probably one of the most difficult problems for some of our lay people is explaining who they are as the United Church of Christ. And they don't want to emphasize differences, but to raise up who we are as a church and what our unique history is. And part of it does have to do with our roots, our background, but also we have contributed a great deal to the history of the United States and to life as it is now. Some of the colleges that we began, such as Harvard, Dartmouth, Oberlin, hospitals, Deaconess Hospital in St. Louis.
Don't forget Yale.
Not Yale. I won't forget Yale. I knew you were going to say that. I just wondered if you'd pick up on it.
I think you're also a Yale Divinity graduate.
Yes.
Yeah. So
we would get it in.
I figured we
well,
needed
you see,
to do that.
I'm Andover Newton, and so I had to.
That's
part
in
of
the
the
Boston
Harvard,
area.
Yeah.
part of the Harvard
So it
consortium.
is concentrated largely in New England, historically, but it's...
Well, from the congregational side is New
Fine.
England rich, but for the German side, the ENR, Evangelical and Reformed, the Reformed seminary is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and the Evangelical side, that seminary is in St. Louis.
Right.
So the Midwest, mainly Pennsylvania over to the Midwest, is very strong ENR background.
And one of the big strengths when we came together as the United Church of Christ was that we really brought the strength of education from the Congregational Christian background and the ministries of compassion from nursing and health agencies and mission was strong in the Congregational. So we really brought together some real strengths from the denominations to make it. We brought the best of both worlds.
And this brings us now to the mission of the UCC Church today. What makes that distinctive? What's unique about UCC ministries and mission?
Rich, I would think that one of the unique dynamics in the United Church of Christ is that we do not consider ourselves unique or special or greater than any other denomination. We are a church that very much believes in what I would call the recognition and reduction of human need. Our church, our denomination, has a wonderful history with regard to the ordination of women. We ordain women in our church, in our churches since the middle of the 19th century.
Oh, really?
I have to correct, well, yes, middle of the
19th century, in 1850.
1853.
Right.
Oh, wow.
But another dynamic that I think is very significant has to do with our non-acceptance of racial oppression. It was the Congregationalists in New Haven, Connecticut, and in the New England area who were very involved in the whole Amistad movement. The Spielberg film has just come out. It was Congregationalists who stood on behalf of those slaves and said this is simply wrong and helped lead to their liberation. The United Church of Christ has, I think, a faithful history in reaching people where they are and how they are and trying to make their life a lot stronger.
Okay. And so its stand on social issues would be a unique aspect of it.
Well,
social
it's not like
distance.
we do it and no one else does it,
Right.
but it's something about which I believe we have some real strength and some real integrity.
To illustrate that, tell what is your policy in regard to the ordination of gays and lesbians?
Well, I'm sure we both can answer that. Ordination in the United Church of Christ is not something that is done nationally by the denomination. Ordination is celebrated within the local area, and in our denomination, each conference has associations within them. So each association makes its decisions on who it ordains. But it is true that nationally, although this would not be the case in every single place, but nationally, we tend not to find sexual orientation is a criteria upon which ordination is decided yes or no. Ordination has to do with one's call to ministry, has to do with one's integrity, has to do with one's theology, has to do with one's faithfulness in serving Christ.
Okay. Do you have anything to add to that, Chrissy?
That, I think, is a strength that in all of our, as a denomination, the autonomy is in the local church, and the local churches form the association. That our General Synod makes resolutions for that support the background of the whole church as they come together at General Synod to make those decisions. And then the local churches support one another in covenant and take up that, and the ordination of gays and lesbians is one of those issues, which I think now most of our conferences have at least ordained one or two.
Well, I think, too, that the contribution of the United Church of Christ, both from the congregational roots and its evangelical and reform roots, have occasion to be aware of its contribution theologically. For instance, Reinhold and Richard Niebuhr, coming out of that E&R background, and that the intellectual life of this country, as well as the social witness, would be something that I think goes back a long ways, and they're the 20th century examples of that.
If I may, Rich, the word that just strikes me, based upon your describing part of I think, the gift of the United Church of Christ, the word that comes to me is the word balance in the pursuit of religious truth. We are not a denomination that looks at religious truth as if it needs to be prescribed, that there's only a certain way that you can be a follower of Christ or believe in God. We look at religious truth as being descriptive, to say, this is what I believe, but I grant you the freedom in your pursuit for religious truth.
Okay. Well, I'm going to grant you the opportunity to take a breath at this point because we're coming up on a break here in our show, and invite you folks to keep with us as we continue in just a moment to explore the United Church of Christ today. Visiting again. We are in the process now, my friends, of welcoming you back to Austin Faith Dialogue, where our subject today is the faith tradition called the United Church of Christ. We've been interviewing Dr. Mark Miller, who is the minister of the South Central Conference, and the Reverend Christine Tinker, the pastor of the United Church of Christ in Copeland, Texas. During the break, you notice we had those little, we won't call them advertisements, they were public service announcements about Austin Metropolitan Ministries. It's a mentoring program, it's hands-on housing. The various ministries, ecumenically speaking, is something that you folks participate in quite readily, I know, and have had a tradition. It seems to me this is part of what we were talking about in the first half, of feeling like you can joyfully enter into a cooperative relationship with other denominations.
Yes. The phrase that is very important in our denomination in describing us that we like to share in relating to other denominations is the phrase united and uniting.
Okay.
And just last summer in 1997, there was a uniting in communion of the United Church of Christ, the Disciples of Christ, the Presbyterian Church, and the Reformed Church of America.
Uniting in what way?
Uniting in terms of our working together in pastors serving churches. For instance, one of my responsibilities is in what we call clergy placement, to help our local churches that need to find a new pastor because their pastor has either retired or taken another call,
Right.
to work with that search committee. What happens now is that it's not only United Church of Christ pastors, but we work very closely in Texas especially with the Disciples of Christ. In fact, we have a church here in Austin, United Christian Church, that is a dual standing or a merged congregation of a former Disciples of Christ church and a United Church of Christ. Okay. So it happens in terms of social programming, it happens in terms of mission work, it happens in terms of working with pastors going to local churches.
Yeah. What about in Copeland? What kind of ecumenical expression do you find there?
Well, the St. Peter's United Church of Christ is at the moment the only church in Copeland, but we are very active, both myself and the congregation, in relationship to the Taylor Ministerial Alliance and in the Elgin Ministerial Alliance. And we especially do ecumenical services and work in the food pantry, transient help, the Goliath project in Elgin. And so actually in Copeland we get to work with two other communities, which is, but most important is that ecumenical outreach, that working with other churches and sharing with them in faith and in dialogue.
Okay. Now, just to broaden that out a bit, Mark, you also as a kind of what you call an executive officer of a mainline denomination, you work with the Texas Conference of Churches.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the Texas Council of Churches is, actually it's the Texas Conference of Churches, pardon me, is a wonderful organization. The offices are here in Austin, and in that organization there is true programming and cooperation and ongoing work with the other bishops and conference ministers that share the responsibilities in their denomination as I have in ours.
So you weren't doing this, though, before you came to Austin.
No, before I came to this position, I served as a pastor of a local church for 31 years.
Yeah. How's it to make the transition from a local church to where you're, just across several states and all these 90 congregations and work with the Catholics and the Methodists and all the others? Are you having culture shock?
Well, I don't want to say I'm having culture shock. As I say, I'm trying to learn how to pronounce some words in Texas because I came from Chicago, Illinois, and up there, ELGIN is not what it is down here.
I see.
But at any rate, I love what I'm doing because it allows me to tap into the experience of being a pastor in a local church to now be a pastor to pastors. And
so the same skills and interests and...
Well, I think so. When a pastor calls and says, well, we've got this dynamic to deal with, what do you think, or can you come and visit with us? Hopefully the experiences I've had are somewhat similar that I can bring that experience to their situation.
If you're a UCC pastor, as you are, Christine, are you going to come at ministry a little differently than others, or is it just the same kind of pastoral outreach that you offer?
I think that I come at ministry the same as other pastors. I had one experience early on in my ministry where I served a United Church of Christ, a United Methodist, and an American Baptist, 3-point charge. And the politics and policy are a little different. But in terms of ministry, a pastor's job of meeting the needs of people and being pastoral and being concerned about what is happening in their life, as well as the worship aspects. But most important, the pastoral care is the same, I feel, no matter what denomination that we are in. And pastoral care is as you well know, the needs of individuals are the most important. And when people are in crisis or have a loss, that is where pastors minister.
Okay.
Can I jump in?
Okay.
At this point? Rich, you've done this program for a number of years, and it may be that some of the folk that are watching now have shared with you in watching you and appreciated your leadership. Christine just talked about the pastoral side of things, and I don't want your program to be, I don't want to be the chair of it, but what Christine and I were made aware of when we came tonight before the taping is that you yourself are going through some really difficult times. And although we're taping this on Wednesday night, March the 11th, less than a week ago, your wife died. And her name, Margaret, you and she had been married for 41 years. And as you indicated, she had really struggled with ovarian cancer for the last 8 years. And so you're right in the middle of this. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing, not just with us, but all the folk that are watching this morning, where and how you are and how your faith has been a source of strength through what has got to be a really difficult time.
Well, I appreciate your letting me say a little bit about that,
Please
because
do.
I am still in the midst of it. And I think I'm going to have to say, first of all, that you talk about a broad support kind of thing that the United Church of Christ represents. Another group that does that is Hospice. Hospice Austin is wonderful. We had them not only in our show in previous times to let the public know about it, but I had an opportunity, and my wife did, to experience their care. And to be able to die at home, as my wife did, is a special blessing. She was there where the background noise was the birds singing outside and not the institutional noise in a hospital. And that was a very, very important part of the kind of care that hospice makes possible. The pain relief. She died comfortably. My sons got here in time to see her, to communicate with her at first, and then as she continued to decline over a period of a week, they were able to see her breathe her last. And to go out of this world is fully as holy an event as to come into it. And I guess the other thing, and this is the first time I've had an opportunity to reflect upon this in a public forum, but I think it's important for folks to know that with Margaret, we had people coming in from out of town, different parts of the country, to take part in her memorial service last week. And I had to say to them, you may have come thinking that you were putting a period at the end of her life. And actually, what she did was to leave us with a hyphen, a continuing process as these friends interacted, and it began to have a life of its own. People that didn't know each other from different parts of our past. And that continues to be a precious gift of my wife, who had this great ability to facilitate those kinds of friendships and loyalties. And so those are some thoughts that come to mind.
Could you say a little bit about the comfort you find, the strength you find? You're a pastor. You've been the one to console people, to bring them comfort, to to help them through these times. Now, as one who is experiencing it himself, what's the function of faith for you, and how it can bring some strength?
Let me just say it's early in the process.
Sure.
Maybe I should talk about this in a year or two. But my experience with folks is it does take about a year or two to begin to work through accepting the loss. And one of the things that has always been helpful to me in my pastoring was that grief is the pain or the tension created between the physical absence of a loved one and the emotional presence. Now, Margaret is very much present to me now.
Yes.
And I will tell you that I still talk to her.
Well, that's important.
I mean,
and helpful.
When I wake up in the morning, she's still there in terms of my feelings. And so why not? I just continue the conversation.
That's right.
And have a sense that, we don't know really what happens after anyone dies. I think anyone makes the claim that they've got, a blueprint of that is a little presumptuous, but that there is a mystery here and there is a sense of continuing presence. So I suspect that I'll continue to do that for a while, and that, I encourage people to do that when I was pastoring to them in the church as well. Now I'm doing it. So how does that sound?
I appreciate your sharing that, because as a pastor, I know people who feel uncomfortable after the loss of a loved one, feeling the way you've just shared with them. And I hope that they have the opportunity to hear that and to know and be able then to share it with others. And that sense that you said, that it's really important that grieving goes on for a year or two. So many people seem to think that, a few weeks and I should have my life all back together.
I guess I call it grief work. I mean, it really is work.
Yes.
And in a sense, I think that it leaves a hole in your being that maybe never gets filled, and yet you broaden your life, I'm anticipating, beyond that, and coming back and revisiting that and letting that hole be the invitation to go into the depth of being again and again, and take it as a blessing rather than as a source of just remorse. Well,
Thank you.
Thank you
for sharing, because it's really important to share how you are also.
Yeah.
And this is an important time, and I know the people that are watching the program value that. The Lord be with you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
And Christine. Thank you, folks, for being with us. Be with us next week on Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Richard Thompson. Peace be with you.